Before I properly start this video, I want to put a disclaimer that this video will contain major spoilers for not only the Moon Knight show on Disney, but also Moon Knight comics. A lot of them. If you haven't already, I strongly encourage you to watch and read the comics before watching if you've had even an inkling of interest in them. Alrighty, you've been warned. Comic books were never really my thing growing up. Not sure why, because I loved reading regular books and I was definitely an imaginative person. I've always been on the fringe of being a superhero fan, especially Marvel, but it took me a while to sit down and engage with it. In fact, it took me watching the MCU to even get an interest, and the first thing I watched? Moon Knight. To this day, even after watching many Marvel projects, is my favorite show on Disney+. I adore how trippy the story gets, the deep dive into a hero's unique mental problems, and introduction to what is now my favorite superhero of all time. I even made it my mission to get every single mainline Moon Knight comic, as I just wanted to know more about him. Speaking of which, Disney, you better be making a fucking Midnight Suns movie. That better not have been a rumor, Disney. You can't just make me fall in love with a character and then never use him ever again, Disney. Tangent aside, Moon Knight is pretty damn cool. But who is Moon Knight? I'm sure many of my Danganronpa audience is asking, and I shall explain. Moon Knight is the Fist of Vengeance. He's an avatar of an Egyptian god of the moon, Khonshu. And for those wondering what an avatar is, it basically means he's doing God's work, as Khonshu can't do it himself. He's towed the line between anti-hero and straight-up hero throughout his existence, but no matter what, his goal is to protect the travelers of the night and deliver justice to those Khonshu demands deserves it. This relationship, of course, is an abusive one. Unfortunately, Moon Knight just so happened to get stuck with the world's biggest brat for a god, which hurts his already deteriorated mental health, because on top of being mistreated, he also suffers from dissociative identity disorder. Man, what are the odds that two of my favorite characters in fiction have DID? About 2 nickels, I guess. Anyway, Moon Knight has 3 different alters. Technically more, but we're not talking about that right now. First, we have Mark Spector. He's the host of the system and the one who came into contact with Khonshu. Mark's got a pretty hefty background. As a child, he lived a pretty simple life at home with his parents and little brother, Randall. One day, Mark had convinced Randall to go play Tomb Buster, an Indiana Jones ripoff they both were obsessed with. In a nearby cave, they seemed to visit often. However, it began to rain, and despite their mother's warnings, they went inside anyway. Unfortunately, tragedy had struck that night as the cave began to flood, and the only one to make it out alive was Mark. After this, his life turned upside down and became a living nightmare. His mother, now fueled with grief and resentment, began physically abusing him, calling him a monster and putting the responsibility of Randall's death all on his shoulders, which, as you could guess, caused him to develop DID. Later on, he runs from home and joins the military to just get away. He eventually got honorably discharged for going AWOL in a fugue state, then, having nowhere to go, became a black market mercenary. One of their missions had them finding an archaeologist's dig site that they were meant to steal from. The original plan was to take what they could and leave the archaeologist alive. However, Mark's ruthless boss, Raoul Bushman, called for no witnesses. Mark, obviously not being okay with this, stood up to Bushman and for it, almost died by being shot. Left for dead, Mark crawls towards a temple the archaeologists were digging in. Khonshu manipulates him to agree to his terms before resurrecting him as his Fist of Vengeance, his Moon Knight. Second is Stephen Grant. He's an interesting one. In the comics, Stephen is a rich playboy that makes his money being a movie producer. He's also the one who funds all of Moon Knight's gadgets like his crescent darts or his, I kid you not, moon copter. He's typically known as the most serious and business-oriented of the 3. An enviable guy all around. Now for the show, imagine the showrunners plucking the Stephen out of the comics, sticking him in a wood chipper and starting from scratch. Okay, I'm being a little hyperbolic, but these two are quite different. The biggest change being the rich playboy that funded everything Moon Knight is now a geeky Egyptologist that lives in a small apartment in London. He's not rich, hell, he works in a gift shop, but he's incredibly kind and compassionate to others around him, but lives a very lonely life as he's also being mistreated by everyone around him, leaving his only friend to be a guy pretending to be a statue. And guess the fish. Finally, we've got to the subject of today's video, Jake Lockley. He's, in the comics, he's a goofy cabbie. He's known for getting information from the shady parts of New York, but he himself is a charismatic and charming guy. But what about the show, right? I mean, that's what I did for Steven. That's what this whole video is about. So, spoiler alert, but Jake doesn't really exist in the show. He's there. He shows up. for like 1 minute. Yeah, unfortunately with the show only lasting 6 episodes, the showrunners only focused on 2 alters in the system, leaving Jake trapped in a sarcophagus in their mind and only giving him a 30-second teaser at the end. A teaser that went nowhere. Because we never got a second season, and because Disney hates me, we never will. This is actually where the whole Jake debacle starts. Because Jake gets next to nothing in screen time, people have taken upon themselves to guess what his characterization could be, and oh boy, is it a fine line between complex character with darker tendencies to straight up stereotypes. There are dozens of fan art and fan works that portray Jake almost like this brooding, dark character that always has blood on his hands, at times even finding pleasure in it. People even have the audacity to say he's the psycho or evil alter, and it isn't just the fans. One of the more popular criticisms of the show from comic fans is this idea of Jake being evil, as it's such a large departure from how he's portrayed in comics, which, frankly, is completely ridiculous to me. You're telling me that these showrunners, the ones that brought actual psychologists on set for scripting, the ones that read books on actual people's experience with the DID,
with a lot of mental health professionals. I read this incredible book called A Fractured Mind by Robert Oxman.
Oh, yeah.
That became kind of like my Bible, because he talks about his whole journey through dissociative disorder.
Would dump all that tactful treatment just to do the whole killer split personality with Jake at the end? That in itself is nonsensical, but I feel like it's a poor interpretation of his character, or dare I say, the wrong kind of interpretation. I'm normally someone that likes different viewpoints on a character from things I like, but in this particular case, we're talking about a genuine harmful stereotype of a group of people. So let's do a deep dive into the Moon Knight show and pick apart each scene with Jake. So, like I said earlier, Jake only gets a proper reveal at the end where we get to see his face and hear his voice. However, the writers have confirmed that Jake does show up in most episodes, typically through these blackout moments Steven and Mark both experience. While they are small, we can still see the end result of these blackouts and draw some conclusions from the greater context of the scene. Now, real quick before I jump into things, it's not 100% confirmed if every blackout was Jake. We know a couple are, and you'll see why later, but the director of the show, Muhammad Diab, has actually said that all the blackouts could be Jake. What that says to me is he could have been in every one, and it wouldn't be out of character if it were. So that's how I'm going to look at things, as if Jake caused all of the blackouts, which frankly, there is evidence behind this, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start from episode 1. The goldfish problem. Now, despite what I said literally a couple seconds ago, Jake doesn't show up by blackout. Being the first episode, a lot of the weirder things that happen to Steven start halfway through, but the scene I'm talking about starts near the beginning.
Hello.
Hello.
How's the sugar trade going?
Don't even know what this has to do with Egypt, really. It's like, they didn't have that back then, did they? No. They had like figs and dates and...
My next tour's here, but just checking, we still on for 7 tomorrow?
7? Tomorrow?
Best steak in town?
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah? Okay.
So, sorry, but... Are you asking me out?
You're funny. I'll see you then.
Now, on first watch, Steven just comes off as an absent-minded, very sleep-deprived man that couldn't remember asking her out. Obviously, we come to find out he has DID, but what's interesting is that the alter we do meet, Mark, has a wife named Layla. It isn't completely out of the realm of possibility that Mark set up this date for Steven. After all, he's been sending him fake postcards, but with how much Mark seems to love Layla, and how completely unsociable this man is.
This is my husband, Rufino.
Yes. Nice to meet you. Pleasure. Oh. I hope you understand this is... Now, if I may ask, why such interest in Senfu in particular?
Oh, actually, our purchases
I'm sorry, but I'd like to hear from your husband, if you don't mind. I think I just would love to take a look. Funny man.
I have a hard time believing it's him. Not to mention, the beginning of Mark's arc has him completely separating his life with Khonshu and Steven's life at the museum. He does what he can to make sure Steven never finds out about him by always keeping Steven set up every night. He puts the tape on the door, no footprints in the sand, puts on the ankle restraints, lets him go to work, take care of a fish, etc. Even when Steven does find out, Mark tries to convince him to ignore it.
Hey, what? Am I possessed? Are you like a demon?
You're in danger, and I can save us, just like I did last night. but I can't have you interfering in what I have left to do. So this is what's gonna happen. You're gonna go lay down on that cot back there. You're gonna take a nice nap.
So it makes absolutely no sense for Mark to suddenly insert himself. Any small amount of Stephen questioning things in his life could cause Mark's discovery. There's no way he'd want to jeopardize that. Therefore, who else could it be but Jake? While this scene is very small and unassuming, there's something we can glean from this, and that's Jake is clearly a charismatic guy. He's someone that doesn't front very often from what we've seen, and yet in a single day, he was able to land a date, presumably masking as Stephen of all people. Also, I don't believe he was trying to land a date for himself like some articles theorize. The girl doesn't mention anything about a different accent or strange behavior other than Stephen not remembering asking her out. So unless Jake was planning on going on a date as Stephen, he most likely did this for him. Like I said earlier, there isn't much here, but this is still a side of Jake worth mentioning, and one I'd like you to keep in mind for later. Besides, this isn't all of Jake in episode 1. Later on, we see Stephen wake up in this strange field very far from home. He runs from the people gunning him down, only to find himself attending a gathering of sorts with the occupants of this town he stumbled upon. Skipping forward a little bit, Stephen ends up becoming the enemy of these people once his body seems to betray him and keeps the item their leader, Arthur Harrow, wants. This is where the first blackout happens, and the aftermath is, well...
No, the idiot's back.
It's quite the bloody scene. This isn't the only time it happens either. In the same episode, Stephen hijacks some cupcake van in an attempt to escape as he doesn't know how to fight to save his life. Literally. Of course, this sparks a chase where one of Harrow's goons gets inside. Stephen does what he can with his limited experience, but eventually he blacks out and again... The man is dead, and Stephen is still driving, but now with a gun in his hand that definitely wasn't there a second ago. Both these scenes exemplify that Jake is a ruthless man. He will kill with no hesitation, which on the surface only seems to serve the idea that, uh-oh, Stephen is secretly a murderer. But if we remember the greater context of the scene, why the hell wouldn't he kill these guys? I mean, they're literally shooting at him and trying to pry something very important out of his hands. In what world is killing them the wrong move? Especially in the later scene when the man literally has a gun shoved in his face from both sides. I assume Jake remembers what's happening as much as Stephen and Mark do, but even if he didn't forget, is it not a reasonable response to do what you can to survive? And just to be clear, this is definitely not Mark. I know a lot of people try to say Jake isn't the only older that kills people, which, yeah, that's absolutely true, but during the chase, after the blackout, Conchu specifically states, "Wake up, Mark."
Wake up, Mark. If he loses the scarab, I'll kill you both.
This doesn't make any sense for him to say if Mark was here the whole time. Instead, he'd be saying something like, "Get a hold of things, Mark," or "Take control, Mark." Not to mention, Mark knocked himself out. I'm not joking, by the way. When Stephen wakes up in the Alps, he has a dislocated jaw and is face planting the ground. Once he gets up, you can see a tower right above him, so... For whatever reason, Mark legit leaped out the window and ate shit on the ground, which is an insanely funny revelation I had when rewatching for this video. Anyway, that's all for episode 1, so let's move on to some of the real meat of this video. There's pretty much no Jake from what I could tell from the second episode, probably because Muhammad wasn't involved. But episode 3 is when he really shines, and not for the reasons that you think. See, Jake's violent streak continues in this episode. I've no doubt anyone who has watched the show remembers this scene.
Stephen, what did you do?
I swear it wasn't me.
Then who was it?
Not only is this scene well known because of the blatant violence, but because both Mark and Stephen acknowledge it for once, making this typically the first sign that there may be more than just these two, which explains a lot, but I digress. I will go into more detail, but I want to backtrack to the start of this conflict because this isn't even the first blackout in episode 3, and surprisingly, this one has never been talked about, even though I believe it's one of the most important. For now, put a pin in this scene. The end of last episode showed that Mark ended up in Cairo to track down the cult's followers as he ended up losing the scarab in the midst of the fight with their leader. See, the reason the scarab was so important was because it was a tracker that led to Amit's tomb, which is the god that the cult is attempting to bring back from being encased in stone. Now with it in the wrong hands, Mark has to find his own way of getting to Amit's tomb first without the scarab before Harrow and his men set her free. That's where this conflict in Cairo begins. Mark heads out the next day in episode 3 and tracks down some of the cultists to hopefully threaten them enough so they spill the beans on the location, which leads to a 1v3 with these guys. However, our poor British gift shopist Stephen obviously isn't okay with this and tries to convince Mark not to kill the guy once he has a knife to his throat. However, right after Stephen pleads with him, it's lights out.
اقف لو سمحت.
بتتكلم عربي؟ امال عاملها اجنبي من بدري ليه؟
Where are you taking me?
You are said airport.
Airport.
Now, I know by just watching that, a lot of you will probably say, what the fuck just happened? Which is a fair assessment when seeing that for the first time. From what we see, Mark wakes up in a cab that's bringing him to an airport that apparently he had asked the driver to go to. That means whoever was in control was running away from the earlier conflict. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, that had to be Stephen, right? After all, right before this particular blackout, Stephen was telling Mark not to kill the man he had a knife to. Knowing Stephen would want to hightail it out of there, it would make sense that he'd be the one getting the cab and trying to get out of Cairo. It lines up with his motivation and the ongoing conflict between him and Mark. This theory gaining more foundation when the man says, "You speak Arabic, why were you speaking like a foreigner?" Which would make even more sense for it to be Stephen, considering his lack of knowledge in this department. Also, up until this point, Jake was shown that he can be violent to those attacking him. If that's the case, why wouldn't he have just killed these guys like the first time? That lended even more credibility towards the Stephen theory. So if there's so much credibility in Stephen causing this blackout, why am I bringing it up when we're supposed to be talking about Jake? Well, that's because, and hear me out, this blackout wasn't Stephen, and I think I can prove it. For one, this is the first time we would have absolutely no idea what Stephen did. You know how before this blackout Stephen told Mark not to kill him? Well, later in this same episode, Stephen does the same thing, although this time, he prompts his entrance.
Give me the body, Mark.
Sorry. You alright?
Then, once Stephen has control, we see exactly what Stephen attempted to do, and the end result. This isn't the only example either. Later in the episode, Layla and Mark find a map that leads to Amit's tomb in hope of getting the location. However, neither know how the map is supposed to be read. This is where Stephen's knowledge in Egyptology comes into play, which forces Mark to let up control, and when he does, we see Stephen run back over to fix the map. We see the end result of his actions. This doesn't happen in Cairo for either blackout, including the prompting. Let me also touch on the fact that all the reasons I gave for Stephen earlier is applicable to Jake. Like, let's say for example, the foreigner point. Yes, Stephen would fit the bill as he can't speak Arabic, but it's not confirmed if Jake could speak Arabic either. We know he could speak Spanish, but that would still be considered a foreign language. Also, while running away would be something Stephen would do in this predicament, what he wouldn't do is make these guys afraid, because right when Mark asks where his driver is taking him, he spots the 3 guys he's been trying, and failing, to interrogate. However, when they see him, they aren't ready to fight like earlier. In fact, they run away. While you could chalk this up to not wanting Mark to threaten them like earlier, if Stephen was the one to front, they shouldn't be pleading to be left alone. Like we saw in an earlier clip I showed, Stephen has the tendency to apologize when he's fighting. So if anything, they should view him as kind of pathetic, a bluffer that didn't have the backbone to actually kill them. I have one more point, and one that cements my belief that this blackout was caused by Jake. However, before we do that, remember the scene I told you to put a pin in? Well, let's finally take that pin out and analyze that scene. This will make sense, I promise, just bear with me. It starts right after the cab blackout. Mark gives chase to the men he's trying to get info out of. When he does catch up, a fight ensues, and once again, he pins one of them up against the wall, threatening him only for Steven to, once again, tell him to stop, obviously distressed. This time, however, a blackout isn't what gets Mark to stop. Rather, one of the three cultists smacks him hard on the back of the head, making him pass out and, well, you already know. Actually, the start of this blackout and the one we were looking at earlier made me realize something, a pattern that I've seen nobody pick up on. Those who are more familiar with the show believe that Jake's #1 response to every threat he encounters is violence, killing his enemy before they have a chance to kill him. However, in every scene so far, including the one I just showed, Jake is at a disadvantage. In episode 1, he's literally hounded for the scarab. In the same episode, he's stuck driving while someone's coming at him from behind, and in this scene, Mark was first knocked out before waking up to find them dead. Remember what position Mark left the body in before the cab blackout? He's got the guy at knife point, and one swift motion could kill him. This is the first time Jake has the upper hand when dropped into the fight, so it's possible his first response isn't actually violence. In fact, I can prove that Jake has self-restraint. When Mark finds himself stabbing one of the men, we see that Jake had left one of them alive, the kid. I think it's incredibly important for people to recognize this because it shows that Jake doesn't kill for the hell of it. He wasn't willing to kill a child, even when he was presumably trying to attack him as well. He probably understood that this kid was misguided to be swept up in all this, and shocker, had empathy. Not too dissimilar to how Mark was towards him earlier in the first fight. I want to emphasize that the showrunners could have had Jake murder him as well, showing that there's no line he won't cross, no matter how ruthless, but they don't, and I think that was deliberate. There's only one scene this point doesn't apply to, but, and I know I've been saying this a lot, we'll get there, because yeah, we still aren't done, we're still only on episode 3, so let's move on. The next episode also doesn't have any Jake, or at least nothing that sticks out, so let's hop straight into the episode that made this show so good in the eye of the public. Episode 5. This is the episode that solidified my love for this show, and I hate that I don't have the opportunity to talk about it in this video, as Jake shows up once. Barely. You two wanna open that? Oh, no, okay. And that's all for Jake in this episode. Though, before I move on, there's most likely somebody wondering about another scene that is theorized to be Jake in this episode, and in some people's eyes, can't be anyone but Jake.
Hey, thank you. I feel really great. I mean, they must pay you a lot of money in this place. You're really good. I tell you what, I feel like $1 million. Never felt so good. I'm gonna see myself out. Thank you, doctor. I don't want to lose the good work we did today. No, hey, listen, Mark. Be gentle with him. Be gentle with him. Listen, I am not your enemy.
The reason should be obvious. This proposed Jake is a lot more aggressive than Mark was in earlier scenes with Dr. Harrow. Also, yes, Harrow's a doctor now, roll with it. And even grabs a paperweight off his desk in a threatening manner. Now, this in itself could just be Mark being more overtly aggressive than before, but people pointed out that Oscar Isaac, the actor, had a far thicker accent that borders on New York rather than the Chicago one Mark has. And if you recall what I said about Jake earlier, you'll know that he mainly operates in New York. Now, I'll admit these theories were very compelling. There's even a point in time that I believed it was Jake, more so because of the accent than the aggressiveness, but still, there was merit to this belief and people ran with it. It got to a point where this theory became so popular that the creators actually addressed its validity. Unfortunately for the theorists, it has since been confirmed that Jake only shows his face in the end, making it confirmed that this is Mark threatening Harrow, not Jake. Which I couldn't be more relieved about, and goes to show that Jake isn't the only violent one here. I think because we never get to see Mark actively kill someone, it's made people forget that Mark can be violent. He will take a life. We literally see later in the same episode an entire cafeteria of people that he's killed under Khonshu, and that's only under Khonshu. Who knows the amount he's killed as a mercenary or a member of the military? The only reason he wasn't killing those people in Cairo was because he needed information out of them. Plus, it's nice to finally see some of the harsh and rigid parts of Mark reflected. This man can get scary when he wants to. We finally made it to the end, episode 6, and oh boy, this is the most we see Jake in one episode, so buckle up because there's a lot to discuss. Starting at the end of the show, after Steven and Mark finally accept each other, fully integrating, which has to be one of the best scenes I've ever seen in a show, they get resurrected by Khonshu to finally put an end to Harrow's terrorism. While they hold their own at first, even getting help from Layla, who's decided to become an avatar herself, now dubbed the Scarlet Scarab, they begin to lose their footing. Harrow gets the upper hand and berates Mark, reminding him of his trauma.
Had Ahmed been allowed to rule, young Randall's life would have been saved. Your family would have been happy. You need only remove one weed from the garden.
Before attempting to kill him again, only now with a magic staff rather than a plain old gun. Once Mark's down for the count, his eyes roll back and...
That wasn't you, was it, Steven?
Not a chance, mate.
Once again, Jake Lockley comes to the rescue by murdering every cultist in sight. While on the surface this is just more violence from Jake, which it absolutely is, it's clearly defensive violence. Mark was about to die. The cultists were shooting at him, trying to stab him. Harrow himself was literally about to suck his soul back to the Jua, and let's not forget, the cult was killing hundreds of innocent bystanders. Everything was on the line, and so Jake did what he does best. He protected them all by stopping the threat. Besides, let's not pretend he's any different than Mark. While Steven was clearly just knocking people out, Mark was stabbing these guys with his crescent darts. He was also killing. The difference being that Jake was more successful and in a way, more capable, even getting to the point of almost killing Harrow, and that is no easy feat considering Mark, Steven, and Layla struggled just to wear him out. The only reason he was alive was because Jake was interrupted by Mark suddenly fronting. Every scene so far, every single time Jake shows up and someone ends up dead, that dead guy, or guys, were trying to kill him first. He's being dropped into random night fights, and for some reason the fandom and critics point to this as evidence of him being evil. He's trying to prevent them from dying. In what way is that an evil act? Why isn't Mark getting the same treatment? I'll tell you why. It's because we get to know Mark. We see the effect these kills have on him, the weight of them hanging heavy on his guilty heart. We don't get that privilege for Jake. All we see is the end result, not the thought process or the reactions, causing people to fill in the gaps. While I could say, and have said in the past, that this is one of the issues with the show, I don't know how much I agree with that anymore. You don't need Jake's reactions to know his actions are justified. All it takes is paying a little more attention to the context. Now, there is one more scene with Jake, and it's probably the scene that mostly caused this bad interpretation of him, and in a way, I can't exactly say I blame them, as my explanations are more speculation than factual, but I still believe there is merit to them. This scene begins with Harrow in a similar hospital Steven and Mark find themselves in the afterlife. He's being taken somewhere by one of the nurses until some strange man comes in and takes Harrow himself. While in the hands of his new caretaker, Harrow notices another nurse, though this time he's got blood pooling around him, very much dead. He gets rolled out of the hospital, thrown into the back of the limo where he faces his old master, Khonshu, which I just realized I never mentioned. Harrow is the past officer of Khonshu, who finally introduces us to the mystery man himself.
Mark Spector truly believed that after he and I parted ways, I wanted his wife to be my avatar. Why would I ever need anybody else when he has no idea how troubled he truly is? Meet my friend, Jake Lockley.
Hoy te toca perder.
Wait.
This is really where things took off. Jake finally gets his chance to kill Harrow and does so with a smile plastered on his face. This tops the cake of Jake's violent streak across the show and frankly, what people point to the most. Some even calling Jake a psycho or someone who takes pleasure in murder from this scene alone, and while in a vacuum I can understand this, if we take what we know of Jake from earlier scenes, then this interpretation falls flat. Jake this entire show has been protecting his system and the people around, running away as his first resort in a situation he can get out of, sparing people he doesn't need to kill and killing others only when they pose a threat, and as a bonus, outside of fights, he knows his way around people. Using these patterns in Jake's behavior, we can understand the reasons behind his actions that aren't, he's so evil. For one, Jake has a natural charm and confidence. He takes away Harrow from his nurse with no conflict, telling her to calm down, easing her concerns with just a few words in order to take Harrow into his own hands. Then we see the dead nurse, the one that's clearly implied to be Jake's victim. As we saw earlier, Jake doesn't kill or start a fight if there's no reason to. So what I think happened here is this is one of Harrow's cultists in disguise. I mean, he had his people pretend to be officers in order to break into Steven's apartment, even flashing a fake badge. When Harrow went to find Steven at his workplace, one of his co-workers was also just a cultist in disguise.
I'd assumed Stephen Grant was an alias. Imagine my surprise to find you here.
Excuse me, Ronnie. This man right here, he's been following me. No, I don't know.
Please, Amit.
Thank you.
Ronnie, you're part of this?
It's not out of nowhere for one of them to fake being a nurse in order to help their leader. Being a clear threat, as he probably helped kill a bunch of people, Jake wiped the floor with him. Finally, when they get in the car and Jake puts a couple bullets in him, do you really think it's unjustified? This entire show, we've seen how manipulative and cruel Harrow is regardless of how consistent he is with his values. He's killed hundreds of people and even killed his own during the gatherings we saw in episode 1. He's a dangerous individual that can do and has done some real harm, and now a god he's endlessly devoted to within him, making him even more dangerous and unpredictable. The smile Jake gives at the end most likely being one of satisfaction rather than pure malicious delight. Further proven by what he says, now it's your turn to lose. Let's not forget the only reason this man isn't dead in the first place is because Mark was done being Khonshu's executioner. This act of mercy wasn't because he believes he's above it. Mark does it for himself. He takes this as a chance to stand against his abuser and finally separate from him for good. Which actually brings me to a point I believe is very important. Jake is most likely being manipulated by Khonshu, which, yeah, if you don't know, Jake has a separate deal with the Big Bird himself, hinted at in episode 1.
Go back to sleep, worm.
Hello?
You're not supposed to be here.
Yep, I completely agree. Where are you?
Surrender the body to Mark.
Sorry, what? The body? What? Surrender the body? What body?
The idiot's in control.
Now this is just a pure theory, we have no idea what their relationship is like, but considering some of the comments made by Muhammad Diab, there's some connective tissue here. Besides, we've seen how manipulative Khonshu can be. He roped in Mark before and will most likely do it again. He can absolutely manipulate Jake as well. And that's all. That's the entire show and every scene that most likely has Jake. Now, with how small his presence is, can I really say definitively that he isn't evil or that interpretation is wrong? Yes, actually. Though we only see the aftermath of his actions, that's still enough to determine if they were justified or not, and like I've said multiple times in this video, they are. An act is only evil if it's committed with harmful and/or malicious intentions. None of those scenes substantiate that interpretation. Yes, even the last one. You know what the actual problem is? It's the subsect of the fans and critics that don't bother to look deeper. They view Jake in a vacuum, which, yeah, if you strip everything else away, you could find a solid basis for the evil alter argument, but frankly, that's not how anything should be analyzed. Why work with less? Especially when what's being ignored is important to the character. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and say that my interpretation is correct either. Most of this video is picking up patterns I noticed and applying them to different scenes in hopes of finding a connective thread, and I could be trying to put pieces in the wrong places. Hell, everyone who tries possibly is. It's what happens when you're working with only half the puzzle. So, technically, a very horrible writer could swoop in and recontextualize, or more like retcon, all these scenes to fit that interpretation, simply because of how small his presence is. You know what could completely rectify this? Giving us more Moon Knight, Disney! Since the mouse isn't going to be using the absolute unit that is Moon Knight anytime soon, I will happily fill in the blanks for what I think should be a proper depiction of Jake Lockley. But before we start thinking about what Jake should be in this Moon Knight adaptation, we need to know exactly who he is in the comics. Firstly, Jake doesn't have the same issues I have with the comic version of Steven. I will be making a whole video about this, but Steven is such a bland character in the comics that writers of Moon Knight don't even know what to do with him half the time. Jake is already a solid character. Even from his conception, he's had many aspects that made him interesting, so there's no need to start from scratch like Steven. But what are those aspects? Well, Moon Knight has had a lot of history, and with it, a lot of reboots, so none of these characters stay very consistent, but that doesn't mean new writers didn't work with what was already there. Now, just to be transparent, I haven't read every single mainline comic yet. I've read everything from 2000 to 2026, and recently I finished the Mensch run, so while I don't have the knowledge of every Jake moment, we don't need it, as 20 years is still a lot of content to pull from. From my research, I can pinpoint at least 5 important traits about Jake that is exemplified in most Moon Knight comics. First, he's an informant. Well, it's more like Jake is the one who gets info from his informants, but I couldn't think of another word, so informant is what you get. This is the most basic aspect of who Jake is, and it's what's defined him in very early comics. Because Moon Knight began in the 80s, DID wasn't widespread and was just officially recognized, so Mark, Steven, and Jake were treated more like alter egos. However, what made them more than aliases was Moon Knight's insistence that certain names were used, never breaking character even when it would seem appropriate to do so. Anyway, because of this, the 3 of them were designated to specific roles, though Jake is only actually an informant in McKay's run when spying on an officer. So let's talk about where he gets his info, as that's equally important. Jake has 2 main sources: Crawley, a homeless man that finds purpose in being Jake's informant, and Gina, a good friend that owns a diner where she serves all kinds of people. Starting with Bertrand Crawley, which, if you think you have no idea who that is, you've definitely seen him in this video. Remember the few scenes with that golden statue guy, one of Steven's only friends? Yeah, that's Crawley, the main informant of Jake Lockley, in the comics at least. Anytime Jake needed literally anything to know what he was up against, he'd end up going straight to Crawley, and man, is he useful. In issue 4 of Doug Mensch's comic run, Moon Knight was being hunted by 5 very talented assassins, all paid handsomely for his death. Having no idea who these people were, he switched to Jake to meet up with Crawley, who got him 3 out of 5 of the names, descriptions of each as well. For the last 2, well, Jake isn't afraid of using child labor, that's for sure. You think I'm joking, but he literally lets Gina's kids find the identity of 2 very dangerous hitmen that, yes, almost killed them. This is not the only time either. There was also that time in issue 11 where he found the identity of the killer of the gay man's girlfriend. Again, I'm not kidding. Issue 25, when he learned more about the Black Spectre, one of Moon Knight's more popular villains, when he was basically destroying his reputation with just plain charisma, and yeah, you get the point. Gina and her boys that I mentioned earlier are Jake's other main informants, and in later comics, most notably McKay, Jake has some bartenders to give him what he needs when these 2 are no longer in his life. Long story. As you can see, gathering information before Moon Knight hits the streets is a large component of who he is, and frankly, something that can't be overlooked in an adaptation. Being an informant is literally what the character was made for. Bonus thing I wanted to mention, since I have nowhere else to put it, so I'm Frankensteining it in this section. Jake is a cabbie. We see in the show, specifically when driving the Cupcake fan, which gives more credibility to my belief that Jake was responsible for those blackouts, that Jake is a phenomenal driver, being able to not only drive backwards on windy roads, but engage in a gunfight. Like, how cool is that? I'm glad they added this too, because it's 100% accurate to the comics. This man is a badass behind the wheel. Too bad he's driving every vehicle except a taxi. I need to see him drive a taxi. So we all know Jake can fight. No matter what version of Jake you know, you've seen him kick some ass. What specifically show fans wouldn't know is that Jake has an entire arc that's about being a vigilante without killing a single person. Back in the 2000s, when Moon Knight was being written by Charlie Huston, which is the most well-known comic for a very specific face-oriented thing that Mark was a part of. Anyways, in Volume 5, there's this whole plot about how Mark Spector died because, yes, they still haven't figured out the DID thing, and he ended up running to hide in Mexico. Which, quick side tangent, I know that Jake only spoke Spanish because the actor wanted to put a reference to his own heritage, but I was shocked at how much that fit Jake as a character. Like, yeah, he hid out in Mexico for months, why wouldn't he know Spanish? Anyway, getting back on track, Jake in this volume and in the following series' first volume, it's made clear that Jake will not kill anyone. He's honestly a little like Batman. He'll beat the crap out of you, but he refuses to take a life. Actually, unlike Batman, he doesn't even beat them bad enough to go to the hospital. The officers literally say that he only left them disgruntled. While there are many instances of this, the most notable time this happens is in Shadowland by Greg Hurwitz. In this story, Bushman gets risen from death to find Mark Spector and kill him. For those that don't know or forgot my little summary for him at the beginning, Raoul Bushman started everything. Mark originally worked for him when he was a mercenary. During the archaeologist heist, Bushman called for no witnesses. Mark stood up for the archaeologist, finding this morally reprehensible, and Bushman tried to kill him for it. Now, while Mark did survive, this still impacted him in many ways, including violent ones that I mentioned earlier. So you would think Jake would harbor similar feelings of hatred and vengeance enough to kill Bushman, but instead, Jake leaves him alive, once more refusing to take a life, no matter how dark that life is. Now, it's impossible to bring this to the MCU. We fully see Jake murder plenty of cultists. We know he's just fine spilling blood when need be. However, what they can do is make him the least aggressive out of the two. I know the show painted Jake like he was more violent than Mark, but there's no reason they can't rectify this. After all, when Mark's at his most violent, it isn't because that's inherently who he is. It's very obvious in the comics, even in the title of this specific run, that he's hit rock bottom. He's part paralyzed, he has to take medication, he's lost his best friend who wants nothing to do with him, he's lost Marlene who can't love him, Gina can't stand to see his face. We actively see him lose everything. The only support he has is Crawley, but it isn't very supportive since he keeps calling him Jake, which he very obviously isn't. Speaking of those two, they're stuck far down into the headspace. Mark refuses to let them front. The only time they do, they're ecstatic that they can finally see the real world again. Mark's even been suppressing the two alters that are meant to be there for him and failing at his role of being there for them. All he has is Khonshu. Sound familiar? It should, because it was a similar arc the show had for Mark, just not on this level, which is exactly how I would introduce this side of Mark. There are a multitude of ways Disney could get him to this point. Mark is still a developing character, and the next story they could tell is him trying to grapple with the stresses he will inevitably face, only to crumble under the weight of his own unhealthy coping mechanisms. Ones like his addiction to pain and violence, giving into them and becoming the wild dog that kills everything that stands in his way. That's how we get a Mark that's more violent than Jake. However, Jake shouldn't be stripped of his violence either. I've definitely seen some comic fans that try to say there is only one Moon Knight comic run where Jake is violent, which is just false. The run they're talking about is the Legacy Collection, and don't worry, I will be talking about this run later in this video, but for right now, I want to clear up that misunderstanding because this isn't the only time Jake has been violent. Back in the 2014 run that was technically written by Warren Ellis has an example of this. The reason I say technically is because he started the run, but it was taken over by two other writers. According to Ellis, he just only had the plan to bring Moon Knight back into the public eye and then dipped. So if you want to know why this run doesn't have a proper story other than aura farming, now you know. Anyway, issue 8, written by Brian Wood, has Jake breaking into a building that's been infiltrated by a terrorist. One of the leading officers, Detective Flint, sends in Moon Knight to take care of it. This operation is a combined effort between Steven, Jake, and Mr. Knight, but what I want to focus on is when Jake not only stops the terrorist before he can blow up half of Manhattan, but in the process, breaks his arm, dislocates his shoulder, breaks his other arm, and kills him in a very painful way that we aren't able to see. Unlucky. Fun fact, this is the only appearance Jake makes in this run. Again, the whole DID side of this character was up in the air for a while, so Steven and Jake rarely make an appearance. Luckily, the run written right after this, which also adds to this particular point, completely confirmed the DID officially. It's my second favorite run of Moon Knight by far. To this day, it's revered as one of his best. I'm, of course, talking about the Lemire run, a phenomenal run that really digs deep into the character's psyche, the clear main inspiration for the show, and a comic I hope to delve into more detail another time. For right now, let's fast forward to issue 9. At this point in the story, Mark is making a meeting with all of his alters in order to let go of them and Heal. Hey, I said the D idea was solidified. I didn't say its depiction was good. Jake obviously doesn't like this idea and tries to fight Mark in order to stop whatever he was doing to them, which causes Mark to say, and I quote, "That's all you know, violence," which is dead-on proof that Jake is indeed a violent person and there's no getting around that. Like I said earlier, this is the comic that showrunners took the most from. This is most likely where they got the idea to make Jake violent, and I'm kinda tired of comic fans of this character completely writing off this trait because it was so poorly handled in the Legacy run. In fact, not only is this a trait that should stay a part of Jake in the MCU, but their backstory in the show really lends well to this interpretation. Of course, an alter born to protect the system from violence in their childhood uses violence in adulthood. It's all he knows. But let's not get this twisted. Just because Jake does commit violence does not mean he likes it. This point in particular is the reason I hate when show fans characterize Jake as somebody who loves murder, because he doesn't. Unnecessary death makes him sick. An example of this is in, I'm being for real about this, the issue written by Stephen Grant. Ain't that a shocker? Anyway, we see here that he gets sick to his stomach when he finds someone he associated with dead on the street, killed in cold blood. Jake is still a character all about heart. He becomes friends with people and is frankly the only one of the three to have a proper social life. Speaking of which, this brings me to the most important part of Jake. The trait that I think if the show version of this character can't deliver on, then it ruins the character as a whole. While yes, Jake has been violent or even callous in earlier versions of his character, one thing that has stayed consistent is his care. Jake is responsible for making all of their friends. Gina and Crawley may be his informants, but he treats them like family. In Lemire, when he sees everyone in Gina's diner, including Gina, dead, he's absolutely devastated, barely able to make a case for himself in the investigation, and goes out on his own to find the killer, to bring justice to the people that took them away from his life. When hiding out in Mexico, a man had talked him into a mission to save his daughter from some kidnappers, tugging on his heartstrings and downright manipulating him to get him on board. While he does try to come off as uncaring at first, when he finally finds her and tries to bring her back, she defies him, pushing him away, wanting to stay in the prison than ever go back to her father. And what does Jake do? Defy his orders, talks to her, listens to her, and what her disgusting excuse of a father puts her through. From there, he does whatever it takes to get her to safety, even though he's still dealing with his own problems of self-loathing, substance abuse, and an abuser of his own. In the end, while Jake doesn't kill him himself, he doesn't try to save him when someone else attempts to take his life, even when he had the ability to do so. It was his way of finally setting her free. He even became friends, or at least friendly, with some people trying to assassinate both him and the girl's father. Most importantly, in McKay, Moon Knight owned a small building for something he called the Midnight Mission. It was a little corner in New York where he tried to make a new life for himself after being manipulated by Khonshu to take over the world. His mission was to help his people, protect his territory. He was so devoted to this purpose that he was not only willing to put his life on the line, but sacrificed himself to make sure no one died to the Black Spectre's plan. Despite his actions, Mark had a hard time admitting this. Being vulnerable, being able to talk about everything, wasn't his thing, but it was Jake's, and he always gave the game away. It was for the people. The Midnight Mission was always about their people, whether it was close friends, or just some people walking the streets, or the scoundrels found in a bar. He may be violent, he may be insensitive sometimes, hell, he may even be scary, but regardless, he just wants to take care of everybody. Jake Lockley is for the people, for all people, even the ones others forget about or abandoned. This is the core of Jake, and something that needs to not only be acknowledged, but fully adapted. I'm a little afraid that because Steven is the heart of the show, that they might focus on Jake's shady nature rather than his giving one. I'm all for adapting characters differently than their comic counterparts, but I truly believe that a good adaptation keeps what makes these characters lovable in the first place, and getting rid of Jake's heart would be like getting rid of Mark's guilt, or getting rid of Steven's, yeah, sorry, coming up blank on this one. Thankfully, despite Steven having so much compassion, the creators did not label him as a caregiver or caretaker, rather a protector, which I fully agree with, so hopefully, if we ever get more of this character, that role can be saved for Jake. To wrap this whole thing up, MCU Jake should at least have 5 aspects from his comic counterpart to make him even feel like Jake Lockley. Being an informant, writing his signature cabbie, though that one is a bit self-indulgent, being less violent than Mark but keeping his violent tendencies, and most importantly, being for the people. I don't really care how these aspects are interpreted. At the end of the day, the MCU is an adaptation of the comic characters. They're not going to be one-to-one, and I don't expect them to be. I just hope they stick close to who Jake is at his core so we don't lose the chance to experience this great character on the big screen. Before I complete this video, I do want to go over something. I've been giving some comic fans a lot of shit for passing MCU Jake off as an evil person, and while I stamp on my own criticism of them, their fear is not entirely unfounded. There is a comic run of Moon Knight that not only does what the MCU fandom does, but absolutely assassinates every character, including Jake. Actually, especially Jake. Remember that Legacy run I said I'd talk about later? Yeah, well, it's later now, and let me show you exactly why some comic fans are afraid of future installments, including Jake, and a possible inspiration they may take. Max Bemis has single-handedly created not only the worst run of Moon Knight, but will forever be a stain on Jake's legacy as a character. You thought Show Jake got violent? Let me introduce you to Legacy Jake, where not only is he characterized as someone who loves to murder people, but has such a horrific imagination that when a man who can see nothing but the truth peered into his mind, he was actively horrified by what he saw. He's constantly making remarks about how well he's progressing by causing pain in other ways that don't involve murder, even though he wants to. And worst of all, he went behind Mark's back, slept with his ex-girlfriend, and didn't tell him about the child he apparently had for 5 years. Bemis turned Jake into a completely selfish, self-serving asshole that doesn't show a shred of empathy for most of the people around him. Sure, he felt guilty for not telling Mark, but clearly not guilty enough to just not sleep with his ex-girlfriend. And if you thought it couldn't get worse, then oh boy, you are wrong. You are just wrong. There's a whole storyline where Mark is forced to do a bunch of trials to test him or whatever, each room making him do terrible things like killing people or, yeah, you're seeing that right, eating a fucking dolphin, just raw, right off the bone. But the room that was the worst and completely sullied Jake as a character was when Mark was tasked with killing an innocent child. Obviously, he wasn't on board with that. To be frank, none of them were. But instead of Jake showing the empathy he usually has, he berates Mark. He calls him weak. He threatens to take over himself to kill the child if he has to because Beatrice, the daughter, by the way, I just realized I never said the name, was in danger if they didn't. Jake, thankfully, can't go through with it, so at least there's that. But take Jake in literally any other run and he would never do this. If anything, Mark would be the one trying to rationalize how to proceed, and Jake would slap him upside the head if he even thought about hurting the child in any capacity. He would actively try to find a solution that doesn't require harming her. But of course, Jake's the psychopath in this, so he's the one calling someone weak for not murdering a child. There is so much more I could say, but I'd rather not talk about this terrible run any more than I have to. This is what comic fans are scared of, what kind of interpretation they fear of receiving, as not only is this a horrible stereotype of DID, which is even worse when you consider Bemis hammered this point home more than anyone, but it's a version of Jake that doesn't even resemble the character people had fallen in love with. That charismatic cabbie was sloppily turned into a caricature, and unfortunately, that interpretation has stuck.
His third personality, Jake Lockley, is so insane. When he was fighting a villain that can only show people the perverted truth, he was horrified by what he saw in Jake's mind. Mind you, Jake is hiding other jacked up shit he's done from the other personalities in his head.
How exactly sick in the head is the third personality of Moon Knight? Knowing that the enemy was powerful, he switched to the personality of Jake, known for being one of the most dangerous of the Moon Knight's personality.
Jake Lockley is the third personality of Moon Knight. Although it's not confirmed that Lockley is this third personality, fans suspect that this could be the reveal of the more violent alter that Mark Spector has. Where Steven is averse to violence and Mark is used to it, Jake is by far the most violent, if we go by the comics. Lockley is a cab driver in the comics, but often displays violent tendencies that outweigh the other two alters.
Jake Lockley, known for his street smart taxi driver persona, Lockley is the true anti-hero of the bunch and is the most brutal.
I'm hoping, really hoping that whoever takes up the mantle at Disney to write this character, they stay in a galaxy far, far away from Bemis. The last thing we need is another piece of media perpetuating more harmful stereotypes. Anyway, that'll be all for this video. I didn't expect it to be so long since I was originally only going to talk about the show, but I also wanted to put my hat in the ring for my wish of who Jake Lockley might be in the MCU. Fingers crossed Moon Knight actually comes back. Speaking of the show, if you haven't already, I implore you, please go watch it. It is really good, and if anything I've said about it intrigues you in the slightest, then I think you'll enjoy it. That goes for the comics too. Jed MacKay has been writing the most recent comic runs, and they are phenomenal. Truly the best comic run for this character to date, and he doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. I recommend starting from the 2021 book called The Midnight Mission. It's the first volume in the entire Jed MacKay series, and don't worry if you've never read anything Moon Knight before. MacKay writes this story with new readers in mind. Trust me, it's worth the journey. Anyway, this video is over now. Bye.